Most people think they understand what a royal divorce looks like. They imagine lawyers in mahogany offices, official announcements carefully worded by palace communications teams, a clean legal separation that tidies up the paperwork and allows everyone to move forward in an orderly direction. They imagine that power and wealth make these things simpler, that having access to the best advisors, the most experienced negotiators, the deepest resources means that the painful parts can be managed away. They are wrong. Royal divorce, specifically in the context of traditional Arab royal families, is one of the most complex, most private, most emotionally loaded processes in human experience. And Fazza's story, Sheikh Hamdan's story, is the clearest window into that world that any of us have ever been given. Today, we go inside, not into the gossip, not into the drama, into the actual reality, the structures, the pressures, the invisible forces that shape what happens when a royal marriage ends. And we use Fazza's story to show us exactly how it all works. Before we go into the specific myths and realities, we need to understand what makes a royal divorce fundamentally different from any other kind. There are four key differences. First, it is never purely personal. In an ordinary divorce, the separation primarily affects the two people in the marriage and their immediate family. In a royal divorce, especially in a family like the Maktoums, it affects the family's public image, its political relationships, its internal dynamics, and the careers and positions of people who were not even in the room when the marriage broke down. Every decision made in a royal separation is made with all of that in mind, which means that what looks from the outside like two people making personal choices is actually a process involving advisors, family elders, political considerations, and the careful management of what gets seen and what stays hidden. Second, silence is not optional. It is required. Public figures in royal families operate under an unspoken but absolute expectation. Personal matters stay personal. This is not just preference, it is survival. The moment a royal family member begins speaking publicly about an intimate separation, they open the door to speculation, to media scrutiny, to the kind of prolonged public attention that damages not just themselves but the institution they represent. This is why in Fazza's story, none of the key figures ever gave a direct public statement. Not Sheikh Hamdan, not his second wife, not Sheikha, except through the carefully constructed ambiguity of a wordless video. Third, the family never really ends. In traditional Arab culture, and in royal families specifically, a divorce does not sever family connections the way it might in other contexts, particularly when, as in Sheikh Hamdan's case, the first wife is also a blood member of the same extended family. The ties do not dissolve, they reorganize. Fourth, the emotional reality and the official reality run on separate tracks. What is officially happening and what is emotionally happening can be, and in Fazza's case, clearly were, very different things. Navigating the gap between those two tracks is one of the defining challenges of a royal separation. With that framework in place, let us go into the myths. Myth 1. Royal divorces are handled quickly and cleanly. What the world thinks. The palace announces it. Lawyers handle the paperwork, and everyone moves on within a few months. Power and resources mean efficiency. What really happens? Fazza's separation has no official announcement to this day. There is no confirmed date, no legal statement, no clean line that separates married from not married in the public record. What happened was a gradual, unofficial, emotionally complex process of separation that played out over months, through poetry, through departures, through silences, without ever being formally declared. Royal separations frequently remain in this unofficial limbo for years, because making them official requires decisions that nobody is ready to make. Meet this. Money and title make the leaving easier. What the world thinks, she was leaving a palace. Surely the wealth, the security, the status made the practical side of departure simple. She had everything she needed. What really happens? The material comfort of a royal marriage is precisely what makes leaving it so difficult, not easier. She was not just leaving a man, she was leaving a world, a title, a social position, a network of relationships, a version of her future that had been built around that marriage. The financial security that comes with being a royal wife does not transfer when you leave. You return to your family's position, which may be significant but is categorically different. And the social cost, the whispered questions, the curious looks, the public knowledge that the marriage did not work, falls entirely on her, not on the palace. Immediately, the family steps in to fix it. What the world thinks. Royal families have elders, advisors, and systems in place for exactly these situations. They apply pressure, broker compromises, and the marriage gets repaired. What really happens? Sheikh Mohammed, Fazza's father, did step in, but his intervention, far from repairing the marriage, was one of the events that accelerated its ending. He encouraged his son to reconnect with Shaker. Entirely reasonable advice, given the family dynamics, without being able to predict that the reconnection would reopen feelings that made the second marriage untenable. Family intervention in royal marriages is not a repair mechanism. It is another layer of complexity, another set of loyalties and obligations that the individuals inside the marriage must navigate. Myths 4. The public story is the real story, what the world thinks. The poems, the social media posts, the visible events, these are the divorce playing out in public. What you see is what happened. What really happens? The visible story, the poems, Shaker's video response, the departure, was the surface of a process that was far deeper, far more private, and far more emotionally complex than anything the public ever saw. The real conversations happened in rooms the cameras never entered. The real decisions were made in silences the poetry could only gesture toward. What the public saw was the shadow of a story whose substance remained completely private. Fazza's story is uniquely instructive because it is one of the rare cases where the emotional interior of a royal separation became partially visible through the poetry, through the timeline of events, through the careful reading of what was said and what was not said. Let me give you 5 facts about how royal separations actually work, each one illustrated by something specific in his story. Fact 1. There is no single moment when it ends. In ordinary life, we look for the moment, the argument, the decision, the date on a document. In a royal separation, the ending is a process, not a moment. For Fazza and his second wife, the marriage ended in stages, emotionally in June, when the poem went viral, practically in August when she left, officially, if it ever became official, much later. Different people experience different moments as the end. She experienced it in June. He may have experienced it only when she refused to return. FA62 poetry and art become the unofficial communication channel. Because direct public statements are impossible, creative expression becomes the substitute. Sheikh Hamdan's poems during 2022 functioned as the closest thing to a public acknowledgement of what was happening that a crown prince could offer. They were not declarations, they were signals, carefully constructed signals that those who needed to understand could read, while maintaining enough ambiguity to protect the official silence. FACT 3. The woman's dignity is managed, not always by her. In a royal separation, significant effort goes into managing the public perception of everyone involved, particularly the woman leaving. The goal is to ensure that her departure is seen as dignified, not scandalous. This is partly for her benefit, but it is also for the family's benefit. A messy, public female departure reflects badly on the institution. The quiet, private nature of her leaving was not only her choice, it was also in everyone's interest. If Fact 4 reconciliation attempts are expected and scrutinized. In traditional Arab family culture, a man who does not make genuine efforts at reconciliation after a separation faces social judgment. Sheikh Hamdan's 4 attempts, the poems, the intermediaries, the private messages, were not only emotionally genuine, they were also culturally necessary. They demonstrated to the family and to the wider community that he had honored his obligations. A refusal, equally, was culturally significant. It communicated that the situation was beyond the point where social expectation alone could reverse it. Sheikh 5. The first marriage never truly ended, and everyone knew it. Perhaps the most revealing fact that Fazza's story exposes about royal marriages in this context is this: the presence of a first wife, particularly one who is also blood family, creates a dynamic that a second marriage cannot easily survive. It is not about jealousy or rivalry in the simple sense. It is about the fact that the emotional, familial, and social connections of the first marriage continue to exist alongside the second, and when those connections are as deep as the ones between Hamdan and Shaker clearly are, the second marriage is always navigating around something it cannot remove. I want to step back from the specifics of Faz's story for a moment and say something about what it reveals at a more general level. We tend to assume, because it is comforting to assume that power protects people from the worst of human experience, that wealth creates distance from pain, that the title is a kind of armor against the most ordinary and devastating things that happen to human beings. Royal divorce, specifically Fazza, disproves all of that thoroughly. Sheikh Hamdan had every resource available to him, every advisor, every intermediary, every financial and social tool that exists. And he could not fix what had broken. He could not reach a woman who had decided she was done being reached. He could not undo, with all his power, the consequences of being honest at exactly the wrong moment. His second wife had every material reason to stay, and the emotional clarity to leave anyway. Power does not protect you from love, and it does not protect you from its loss. What Fazza's story reveals, more than anything else, is that the most fundamental human experiences, the longing, the grief, the dignity, the choice of self over comfort, operate exactly the same way inside a palace as they do outside one. The marble floors and the crown and the poetry that goes viral across the Arab world are the surface. Beneath them, just people, trying to love and losing and learning to live with what they could not change. I want to close the main section of today's video with something I genuinely feel when I think about this story: gratitude. Not for the pain of the people involved, that is not something to be grateful for, but for the rare, unusual circumstance that made some of that pain visible to us. Royal marriages end all the time. Royal families navigate separations, complicated loyalties, and the collision of official life and emotional reality constantly, in every country across every tradition. Almost none of it is ever seen. Fazza's story became partially visible because of who he is, a poet who cannot stop writing even when writing costs him, a man whose most honest self exists in public language rather than private conversation. Because of that, because of the poems that he published when a more politically careful man would have stayed silent, we have been given a window into a world that is almost never opened, not a complete window, not a transparent one, but enough of a window to understand something true about what happens when a royal marriage ends. And that understanding, rare, partial, imperfect as it is the gift that Fazza's story has given anyone willing to look closely enough. What happens inside a royal divorce? Not what we imagine, not the clean legal process managed by powerful advisors and protected by institutional resources, something far more human: myths that do not survive contact with reality, processes that are messy and unofficial and emotionally loaded in exactly the ways we would be if we were in that situation, regardless of the palace around us. And in Fazza's case, a man whose poetry refused to stay quiet even when silence was what his position required, a story that became briefly, partially, extraordinarily visible. If today's video taught you something you did not know about royal families, about how separation actually works, about the gap between what we imagine powerful people experience and what they actually do, please share it. That is what this channel is for, going deeper than the surface, finding the human truth inside the royal story. Subscribe if you are new, and I will see you in the next one.